I'd like to call to order the Plan and Zone Commission meeting of today, Tuesday, November 14th. It appears as though we do not have a public hearing tonight, so we will move on to our regular meeting. Roll call, please.
McConnell present. Hepner.
Here.
Ingram.
Present.
Gelling.
Here.
Lammers.
Present.
Manis.
Here.
Martinez.
Here.
Med.
Here.
Quinn.
Here.
And Reinhartz.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to make mention that Commissioner Tallman isn't here tonight because of his knee replacement surgery, and that has all gone well. He's resting comfortably at home. Hope to see him at our next meeting, is what he's telling me. Report of City Council activity. Secretary's report.
Pass the report.
Second.
All in favor of the report as printed, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It will be passed on as printed. Report of Comp Plan Committee.
We did meet last week with our consultant, and we didn't quite get done over 2 days, but we'll schedule kind of a wrap-up of our first review of the code within the next couple weeks.
How'd it go?
To go, just wonderful.
Thank you. We'll let it go at that. Sort of. Zoning activity, it appears as though our only case, REZ 17-08, is still on the table. Subdivision activity, we have none. Future business, we have none. Communications. Anybody in the audience like to speak? Then we'll move on to other business. Case number FPV 17-01 is a request of 321 Partners LLC for a floodplain variance at 321 East 2nd Street to allow a historic exemption to floodplain regulations. The developer is proposing a substantial improvement / renovation to allow mixed-use commercial residential building. Staff recommends that the Plan Zone Commission accept the listed findings and approve the request subject to the following conditions and for case number FPV 15-01 to the Iowa Department of Natural Resources for its concurrence. There are 3 listed conditions, and I would so move.
Second.
Case number FPV 15-01 has been moved and seconded for discussion. Wayne?
Actually, I would like to add 2 more conditions,
Okay.
just for clarification for the developer. Number 4 would be that flood-resistant materials be used below the base flood elevation plus 1 foot. That would be the freeboard. And then number 5 would be that a detailed emergency operations plan be submitted prior to project completion. Basically what that indicates is within the letter from the engineer indicated that there will be some emergency methods needed in a time of flood, let's say, especially if our HESCO barrier wall gets overtopped or fails, that there are some emergency things that they would be doing. We need to have that as a detailed plan. It's part of our ordinance requirements, but this kind of makes it a little bit more clear for the developer.
Okay. Is the developer here now?
Yes.
Are you aware of these 2 additional conditions?
I'm not, but I'm the architect.
Can you come forward and identify yourself?
I'm Andrew Dasso with Design Build by Architects at 318 East 3rd Street in Davenport. Guess I'm here to represent the developer. And, I understand the conditions, meaning those are the rules. So the challenge here with the 1 foot above the floodplain is that takes us, it's 1.2 feet above our first floor. And we're going through a historic renovation of the,
Could you come closer to the mic, please?
it's a historic renovation of the first, second, and then on the southwest corner, we're renovating the third, fourth, and fifth floor to be like a loft penthouse. The challenges with using flood-proof materials on that 1 foot on the first floor will be, how do those materials interact with the requirements provided by SHPO? So I think that might be the biggest constraint for us, is that 1 foot elevation on the first level, because of the nature of the project, the ability to restore the walls using plaster, which I think plaster would qualify if it has, but then there are interior walls as well. So, and there are other ways, but I think we'd have to look at what the requirements would be for those walls and anything within that 1 foot on the first floor, and then to make sure that we're able to still meet the SHPO requirements for the project, meaning the historic preservation.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would not be adverse to adding that in condition 4, that the flood-resistant materials be used below the BFE +1, with the caveat that they do need to meet SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office requirements.
Thank you, Wayne, for that clarification. Did you want to go through with your presentation
Yes.
first? And
I will try and keep it a little bit brief, though I take this as an education moment for the commission. This is the property. It's located at 321 East 2nd Street. This is actually what is termed a fermet. It's a reduced portion of the flood insurance rate map. You can produce those. I think some realtors are very familiar with these. But you can produce these from the FEMA's MAP Service Center. And what this shows is that this property is located within this darker blue or darker gray area, which is the 100-year floodplain, or the 1% annual chance floodplain, or the special flood hazard area. I can go on and on. I won't. Oops. This is the, this thing's moving quick tonight. This is the elevation certificate, and the two primary indications here that I have to look at, besides the whole thing, is this, which gives us the base flood elevation. That's the 100-year flood elevation. And then the first floor elevation, which includes the basement or crawl space. And then the top of the next higher floor, which in this case would be the first floor. Both of those, as indicated in the report, are below that flood elevation. Therefore, I need to take a look at this. What the floodplain development permit actually then shows, well, I'll go on here first. This photo's been turned so you can see it. These are photos which are included with the elevation certificate for FEMA and for the insurance company. This is what they're proposing. Basically shows you the north side and east side of the building, so they are doing some quite significant improvements. And as stated in the report, the value of those improvements creates something termed a substantial improvement for this building. In other words, there's an assessed value or a market value current to that building. If you exceed 50% of that value, you are now a substantial improvement and you must comply with the flood damage regulations. These are photos then of that same angle of the building, showing, yes, they're going to be doing some significant renovation here. This shows you the basement floor, which they are proposing to retain as empty. And then this shows you the first floor with a meadery, I think it's called. Is that okay? And then a restaurant over on this side. And primarily the condition number 4 that would be added, the flood resistant materials, is, yeah, if you're going to doing some partition walls, if you're putting some insulation, let's say either for sound or for heat in various locations, it's not going to be something that's going to wick water up those walls. You know, if that floor were to get inundated, it's not something which is going to cause further damage that's already above where the floodwaters would be. So that's why we say flood damage resistant material, something that can sit in water and not really cause additional damage. You're here because we've made a decision in the past that historic exemptions require a variance, because we want to take a look at the project, see if there's anything else which may come into play here that is important. We've done another variance somewhat recently, I want to say 2006. That was the Riverwalk Lofts property. That was the historic Linograph building, former Salvation Army residence hall. That was because they were doing parking that is actually below grade on all four sides. And as a residential use, you cannot have parking below grade. As a commercial use, you can have a basement that would then need to be either flood-proofed, either wet or dry flood-proofed. But then you'd also have to flood-proof your first floor up to that base flood elevation. And in the city's case, it's the base flood elevation plus 1 foot, because we have a foot of freeboard, which is required through the state. The subject property is designated as a contributing structure in an area that is eligible for a district to be nominated. SHPO has looked at this. They've said, yes, this is an eligible area. There's been a more recent study that's been done, I think just this year, by the downtown, and they are in the process of submitting an application to the State Historic Preservation Organization, as well as for a large area and then this smaller area, which would include the subject property. The state has indicated that it looks good for those. The downtown is, again, Downtown Association proceeding with that nomination. We would prefer mitigation to be done on these buildings. The city does mitigation in the sense of keeping the access to the government bridge open. And then we do kind of extend that to tie into the wall that goes around the Radisson parking lot. We do that because otherwise water would infiltrate around and come back through from the west and then flood this area as well. So we tie into those walls. The benefit for the property owners is that we offer them some flood protection. What's not so good for the property owners is that FEMA does not recognize that as flood protection. So then they do require individual properties, as they do substantial improvement, to make these improvements. Our ordinance has two ways of looking at this: as a historic structure or as one that is eligible to be in a district. We can either exempt them completely, or we can exempt them through the variance process, by which we take a look to see if we need some additional conditions and to work with the owner. Another property just down the street, the Peterson Paper building, they were able to comply with our requirements. Basically, one of those requirements they said was you got to fill in your basement. You lose that basement, but they were already listed as a local landmark, so that was not a concern to them at that time. And then their first floor was also above that flood elevation, so they didn't have to, it wasn't the same type of conditions as we're looking at here, where your first floor is then below the flood elevation. The proposed development meets the goals of the city's comprehensive plan, specifically the historic preservation chapter. We do want to see our older buildings preserved. The proposed development fosters economic redevelopment of this portion of the downtown's eastern core. Most of the development or redevelopment in that area has been occurring further to the north, a little bit to the east, or a little bit to the west, not so much in this little bit of an area here. And then as condition, the proposed development is the minimum variance necessary. So with that, these were the three conditions listed in your packet, and then with those two, as I modified, would be acceptable. Most of these are requirements that would be either through the state or through the National Flood Insurance Program itself. Our ordinance has to comply with those minimum requirements. So we do look at their guidance as well when we do these conditions.
Thank you, Wayne. Commissioners, any questions for staff or for the developer's representative? None? Oop, Commissioner Manus.
I guess I would just like to ask Wayne, are there any drawbacks to doing this? It certainly appears to me that with the conditions being recommended, it's certainly appropriate to do it.
If you had read through, and I'm assuming you did, the 70 some odd pages or 90 some odd pages in here,
I won't claim to have read them all.
there was a letter from their structural engineer that indicated that there may be some question if it were to be dry flood proofed and water would be against those walls. But one of the ways of doing this is to wet flood proof that basement. In other words, you allow water to come into it. That equalizes pressure on both sides of that wall so you don't have a collapse. So yes, there potentially are some drawbacks to it. You get a flooded wet basement. You have to pump that out later as the flood waters have receded. If you pump it out too fast, you can cause collapse of your wall. A number of those have occurred during the, I think, 1990 flooding along the creek systems, where people tried to keep their basements dry, kept pumping the water out. Well, all that hydrostatic pressure from saturated ground pushed against those walls and collapsed part of their basements. So in this case, they're wanting to equalize that pressure by allowing that water to come into the basement, which is an acceptable wet flood proofing method. It's not ideal, but it's allowable. What we're concerned with is, if our methods do fail or they can be overtopped. And I think our flood from 2 years ago, there was all of a sudden a 2-foot jump in water within a few days. Luckily, we had put our HESCO barriers up to a higher level than that to begin with, just on the off chance something were to occur like that, because it's difficult to go back and make a correction. Like any levee, if you start putting in sandbags and everything else, instead of just adding a little bit to the top, you have to widen out the base and add to that. And that is very difficult to do in a short amount of time. So our concern with looking with these conditions, as well as the emergency operations plan, to see how they're going to protect their building or their first floor if our system were to fail. And sometimes it's not if, it's sometimes when that fails. We do a really good job of protecting that area and protecting access to the bridge, but we're fallible. Something can happen.
Commissioner Reinhardt.
Thank you. One question, is this variance going to be attached to the project, or in the event the project doesn't get completed, will this variance be with the building if someone else down the road decides to do it? Something with
The
it.
variance would be attached to the building.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Quinn.
When I was just curious, would the health department need to weigh in on this, considering they're trying to put perhaps a restaurant or a dining establishment inside a building that could flood?
To my knowledge, no, the health department would not weigh in on the fact that it could flood. They may weigh in after the fact, in the sense that if it were to flood, before they would be able to reopen, they would need to meet sanitary conditions, so they may enter at that point in time.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lammers.
Are you accepting responsibility for the 2 additional conditions tonight? Or do we need to communicate to another person before we even vote on these? Or do we move forward saying this is what you're going to need to do upon approval.
Well, you would need to add those to the three conditions that were
I
read.
need a motion for that.
Need a motion for that. Again, usually the conditions we place on something like this are already within our code itself, so they would have to meet these,
Okay.
or it's very similar to that. But these are kind of for clarification and to make things a little bit easier to let the developer know.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. And then the second one was that room service plans.
Your emergency operations plan just needs to be submitted at some time.
Okay. Regarding condition
Could you
4.
please identify yourself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Pete Stopulus, a member of 321 Partners, who is developing this project. Hi, Tom. How are you? Number 4, flood-resistant materials. If anybody has any knowledge of SHPO and how they work, they basically already said no to that because it'll take away from the historic characteristics of the building and the development. I had a conversation with our consultant today about that, and she said SHPO said absolutely not to any flood-proofing materials below the base flood elevation +1, which would put us in the first floor, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So, and because there's historic plaster, there's historic concrete columns, there's all these items that are in there that add to the significance of the building, which is the whole purpose of doing this project. So, they basically said they won't approve it.
Even including the front storefront windows are wood sash, so
Yeah.
it'll wick right up the wood.
Any questions while I'm up here?
Commissioner Lammers?
So this may be more towards Wayne. If that was a necessary condition of an established ordinance, and the condition that you put on in accordance with SHPO's recommendation, does that eliminate condition 4 then?
I would say we could just eliminate condition 4 and move 5 up to be the
And
new
it still
4.
provides a safe structure?
Yeah, basically, the exemption is to meet SHPO requirements.
Okay,
So if they're saying you cannot do this, that's what it would be. You cannot do this.
okay, thank you.
So basically, number 3 speaks to number 4, essentially. Sorry, number 3 speaks to number 4, the petitioner provide
Yeah.
comments, so we can just get SHPO to provide the comments. And yeah, everything else seems pretty straightforward.
Commissioner Hebner?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the new 4 listed conditions.
Second.
Hang on just a second. Commissioner Lammers?
Just clarification. One new condition?
Right, one new
Okay,
condition
thank you.
on top of the 3 original ones
Got it.
for a total.
Thank you.
Is this yours?
Let's take a roll call vote on the amendment of the conditions. Commissioner Connell?
Hepner?
Yes.
Ingram? I'm sorry. Kelling?
Yes.
Lammers?
Yes.
Manus?
Yes.
Martinez?
Yes.
Med?
Yes.
Quinn?
Yes.
Reinertz?
Yes.
And Connell, yes. Motion passes.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions before we take a vote on the petition? Seeing none, roll call, please.
Kelling?
Yes.
Lammers?
Yes.
Manus?
Yes.
Martinez?
Yes.
Med?
Yes.
Quinn?
Yes.
Reinertz?
Yes.
Connell, yes. And Hepner?
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Connell. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you.
It appears as though we have no additional items. Would anybody in the audience like to speak tonight? Seeing none?
Move to adjourn.
All those in favor of adjournment, signify by. Opposed? We are officially adjourned. Please drive home safely.